The stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck, cold and silent. Captain Lyle Garnet stood there, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the enemy ship hanging in orbit. It looked like a black spear, sleek and cruel, a MR-Arcan war cruiser. Even from here, he could almost feel its presence pressing against his chest, daring him to blink first. The command deck was tense. No one spoke. Only the low hum of the ship's systems filled the air, steady like a heartbeat before battle. Lyle finally broke the silence. "So that's her," he said softly, "T. Zilka of the MR-Arca." His second officer, Lieutenant Hallen, shifted nervously beside him. "Yes, sir, the scourge of Varney's belt. She destroyed 3 stations in under a day, whole colonies gone." Lyle's jaw tightened. He'd read the reports, all of them. The MR-Arca were born on a death world, a planet where even the air tried to kill you. Everything there was designed to survive by violence, and they brought that same hunger into space. The Galactic Council called them Deathworlders. Others called them monsters. But humans had their own kind of monsters. "Open a channel," Lyle ordered. The comms officer hesitated for a second before nodding. "Channel open, Captain." The view screen flickered to life, showing the face of T. Zilka herself, tall, scaled, and coldly beautiful in a way only something deadly could be. Her golden eyes glowed faintly, and when she smiled, it was all teeth. "So," she purred, her voice like metal scraping against stone, "the humans send another soldier to die." Lyle met her gaze without flinching. "Captain Lyle Garnet, United Galactic Fleet, you're trespassing in protected space. Withdraw now or face consequences." She laughed, a low, rumbling sound that made the crew stiffen. "Consequences?" she mocked. "I've fought Deathworlders before, human. Your kind are soft, fragile, you bleed too easily." Lyle allowed himself a smirk. "I've fought Deathworlders before too," he said quietly, almost like a challenge. "And they bled just the same." For a moment, T. Zilka's smile faltered, then returned sharper than ever. "We shall see if your words taste as brave as your blood." The screen cut out. Silence fell again. Lyle took a long breath, the kind that tasted like metal and smoke before a fight. "Battle stations," he said calmly. "Let's show her what fragile looks like when it refuses to die." Hours later, the ship Resolute was alive with motion. Engines thrummed, shields flared, and the crew moved with quiet precision. Lyle walked among them, offering nods and brief words of encouragement. He could see the fear behind their eyes. They were outmatched. Everyone knew it. The MR-Arca weren't just stronger. They were faster, crueler, and they fought like animals that had never known mercy. But humans didn't need to be the biggest predator in the galaxy. They just needed to be the one that never gave up. Hallen approached, datapad in hand. "Enemy fleet forming up, sir. Looks like 6 escorts and 1 flagship." 6-to-1 odds, Lyle muttered. "Not bad." Hallen blinked. "Not bad, sir." Lyle smiled, a tired, crooked grin. "I've had worse mornings." He moved to the bridge window again, watching as streaks of light flickered across the black void. Somewhere out there, the MR-Arca were preparing their strike, brutal and efficient. But he'd seen this before. Every time someone thought humans were weak, they forgot one thing: humans fought dirty. "Tell the gunners to hold fire until my mark," he said. "We'll make them think we're retreating." Hallen frowned. "Retreating." Lyle's eyes narrowed, focused and cold. "Let her chase us, then we turn the trap." He could almost hear his late father's voice in his head, the same words he'd said during Earth's last planetary defense campaign. If you can't outgun them, outthink them. That was how humanity had survived everything from stone spears to orbital bombardments. They adapted. They endured. Minutes later, the stars outside exploded into light. The first volley came fast, plasma fire screaming across the void, smashing into their shields with a thunderous crack. The ship shook violently. Alarms wailed. Sparks flew across the deck as consoles overloaded. "Shields down to 70%, someone yelled. Lyle gripped the edge of his chair. "Maintain course, engines full burn." The ship lunged forward, streaking through the debris field of a shattered moon. Behind them, T. Zilka's fleet followed, confident, hungry. They wanted the kill. "Sir, if we keep running like this," Hallen began. "We're not running," Lyle said firmly. His voice was calm, but his heart thundered in his chest. "We're leading them exactly where we want them." He opened a private channel to engineering. "Commander Vance, is the relay field ready?" "Almost, Captain," came the reply, heavy with static. Powering it now, but if it fails, we'll be blind. It won't fail, Lyle said. Not today. Outside, the Resolute dove between jagged asteroid fragments, their surfaces glittering with ice and iron. The MRRK followed without hesitation, their war cruisers cutting through the dark like blades. T. Zilka's voice came through over the open channel again, mocking, confident. Running already human, I thought you were different. Lyle smiled grimly, leaning closer to the mic. Keep following, T. Zilka. I want you close when you see what Fragile can do. She laughed again, but there was a hint of curiosity in it now. Then entertain me, little soldier. The Resolute banked hard, skimming past the largest asteroid in the field. The rocks ahead shimmered faintly, invisible to most scanners, but not to Lyle. His trap was ready. Now, he whispered. Vance's voice came through, activating the relay field. A bright burst of blue light flashed through the void, an electromagnetic surge that rippled outward like a tidal wave. For a brief second, the space between the asteroids lit up, and then chaos. The MRRK ship's sensors went dark. Their targeting systems scrambled. The lead cruiser plowed into a drifting rock, exploding in a burst of fire and debris. Lyle clenched his fist. Fire all batteries. The Resolute unleashed a storm of plasma bolts, lighting the dark sky with fire. The first wave of alien ships fell apart under the sudden counterattack. And through it all, Lyle stood firm, eyes burning with that fierce, human fire, the kind born not from strength, but from refusal. He wasn't fighting to win a battle. He was fighting to prove something deeper. That even in a galaxy full of monsters, humanity still had teeth. The Resolute drifted in silence after the chaos, her hull still glowing with the heat of battle. Debris floated like shattered stars across the void, fragments of alien ships, torn metal, and drifting bodies. The trap had worked better than Lyle hoped, but he knew it wasn't over, not even close. Damage report, he barked. Shields down to 40%. Rear engines offline. We've lost 2 gun batteries, Hallen replied, his voice tense. But the MRRK took heavier hits, 3 ships destroyed, 2 crippled. Lyle nodded, breathing slowly, and the flagship. Still coming, sir, Hallen said, glancing at the scanner. She's angry. Of course she was. T. Zilka wouldn't run. She was a Deathworlder, a predator. And predators didn't retreat, they hunted until there was nothing left. Lyle stared at the tactical map, the red icon of T. Zilka's flagship burning brighter than all the others. His ship was bleeding power, his crew exhausted, but something inside him, something stubborn and old, refused to give in. He pressed the intercom. All hands, this is Captain Garnet. You fought well, damn well, but this fight isn't over. The MRRK think we'll break. They think humans bend when the world goes dark. Let's remind them we don't bend, we endure. Across the ship, weary voices rose in a ragged cheer. They were scared, he could feel it, but they were also human. That meant they'd fight until the last breath. Minutes later, the sensors screamed again. Enemy flagship approaching. Multiple energy signatures, she's charging her main cannon, Hallen shouted. Lyle's stomach sank. The MRRK supercannon could cut a ship in half with one blast. There was no surviving a direct hit. Brace for impact, he shouted. The world went white. The blast slammed into the Resolute, tearing through the side hull. The deck buckled, consoles exploded. The lights died, plunging everything into red emergency glow. Lyle was thrown hard against the wall, his breath knocked out of him. He could taste blood. For a long moment, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears and the groaning metal around him. Then, faintly, cries from his crew. Medical to Deck 1. Fire in the engine bay. Captain down. Lyle pushed himself up, coughing. I'm fine, he shouted hoarsely. His shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it. Status. Shields gone, Hallen said, voice shaking. Hull breach in sectors 4 and 6. We can't take another hit like that. Through the cracked viewport, the alien flagship loomed closer, a monstrous shadow crawling across the stars. Its weapons glowed like molten suns. She's hailing us, the comms officer whispered. Lyle wiped blood from his face, put her through. T. Zilka appeared again on the main screen. Smoke curled lazily behind her, though she seemed untouched by the battle. Her golden eyes gleamed with dark amusement. Still alive, human, she purred. Impressive, but your ship is dying, your crew suffers, why keep fighting? Lyle looked straight at her. Because we don't stop, it's not in our nature. Her grin widened, sharp and cruel. You're surrounded, outmatched, and burning. What can one fragile creature do against a Deathworlder? Lyle leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Whatever it takes. He cut the transmission before she could answer. The bridge trembled again as another barrage hit. Systems flickered, sparks flew, and alarms wailed louder. Smoke filled the air, stinging his eyes. The Resolute groaned like a dying beast. Hallen stumbled to his side. Captain, we can't hold her off. We have to retreat. Retreat where? Lyle snapped. She'll follow us to the edge of the stars. We end this here. But, sir... Lyle turned to him, his expression grim but fierce. You wanted to serve on a frontline ship, Lieutenant. This is it. Right here, right now, this is where we make our stand. For a second, Hallen hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Below decks, engineers fought to keep the ship alive. Sparks rained from ruptured pipes. Coolant hissed through broken vents. Commander Vance shouted orders over the noise, his face slick with sweat and soot. Reroute power to the forward shields, he yelled. Sir, we don't have shields. Then reroute it anyway. They worked with bare hands, risking burns and electrocution because they believed in one thing: their captain would never stop fighting, so neither would they. Back on the bridge, Lyle watched the enemy flagship slowly turn for another attack. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to save what remained of his ship. But he couldn't. Zilka was right, humans were fragile. But what she didn't understand was that fragility could also mean fearless. When you had everything to lose, you fought harder. Target her weapon core, he said. Load the last torpedoes. Hallen's eyes widened. That's suicide, sir. We'll have to get within their firing arc. Exactly, Lyle said softly. She won't expect that. He took a deep breath. The bridge was silent except for the hum of failing systems. Let's make it count. The Resolute accelerated, engines roaring to life one last time. The stars streaked past as they charged directly toward the MR Arcan flagship. The crew braced themselves, some whispering prayers, others gripping their stations like lifelines. Zilka's voice came through again, calm and amused. You charge me? Foolish human, you'll die screaming. Lyle's hands tightened on the controls. Maybe, he said, but you'll remember my scream. At 100,000 kilometers, the enemy cannon began to charge again, glowing brighter and brighter. Now, Lyle shouted. The Resolute fired every torpedo at once, a dozen streaks of burning light tearing through the void. The flagship's shields flared, absorbing most of the impact, but one, just one, struck true, piercing the outer hull and detonating near the main cannon. A shockwave rippled through space. Zilka's ship staggered, its weapon offline. Cheers erupted across the Resolute. Lyle exhaled shakily. Don't celebrate yet, she's still alive. But deep down, something inside him stirred, a spark of hope. They had survived the impossible. And now, it wasn't just about defending the fleet. It was about proving, once and for all, what it meant to be human. Because Deathworlders fought to conquer. But humans fought to endure. The bridge smelled of smoke and ozone. Red warning lights pulsed across the ceiling, painting everything in a harsh glow. The Resolute creaked as if it were alive and in pain. The last battle had left deep scars, ripped hulls, silent decks, and too many empty chairs. Yet against all odds, the ship still held together. Captain Lyle Garnet stood at the center of the chaos, one hand pressed to a cut above his brow. His uniform was torn and stained with soot. Around him, his surviving officers worked with grim focus. They didn't need orders to keep fighting. It was instinct now. Status, he said, voice rough but steady. Hallen checked the console. We've got partial shields online, engines at 40%. Weapons, 2 batteries still functional, maybe 3 if engineering can work miracles. Lyle grunted. Vance always works miracles. The crew chuckled weakly, a flicker of spirit amid despair. It wasn't laughter, more like defiance. Then the sensors chimed. Enemy flagship still active, Hallen said quietly. She's moving toward us. Lyle looked at the display. The MR Arcan ship was still burning, but it refused to die. It came crawling through the wreckage, its enormous shadow cutting across the field of stars, like a wounded beast, furious and relentless. Zilka wasn't retreating. She was coming to finish the job. Lyle's voice dropped. All remaining power to forward shields. Get everyone off the lower decks. Seal off damaged sections. Yes, sir. He could feel the fear building again, thick as smoke. The crew was tired, some barely standing, but their eyes stayed fixed on him. They needed him to believe, even if he didn't. That was the job of a captain, to carry the fear so others didn't have to. The comm crackled. It was Commander Vance from engineering, his voice strained over static. Captain, I've got good news and bad news. Give me the bad, Lyle said. The reactor's overheating. If we push it any further, she'll blow. And the good. We'll have full power for about 10 minutes. Lyle allowed himself a grim smile. Then we'll make those 10 minutes count. Outside, the stars seemed to flicker as the two ships closed the distance. The Resolute moved like a battered wolf, shields flickering, engines groaning. The MR-Arcan flagship loomed ahead, massive, gleaming with alien fire, its weapons heating like a rising sun. Hallen swallowed hard. Sir, she's hailing us again. Let's hear her. Zilka's face filled the screen, blood streaked across her scaled cheek, but her eyes still gleamed with amusement. You are persistent, human, she hissed. I expected you to run. Yeah, people keep expecting that, Lyle said. They're always disappointed. Her teeth flashed in a cold grin. You're finished, Captain Garnet, you've proven entertaining, but this is where you die. Lyle looked at her calmly. Maybe, but if this is where I die, I'm taking you with me. Her grin faded just a little. The next barrage hit like thunder. The Resolute shook violently, metal screaming in protest. Consoles exploded, tossing sparks into the air. One officer was thrown backward, lifeless before she hit the floor. Shields failing, Hallen shouted. We can't take another. Keep firing, Lyle roared. The ship's cannons answered with a roar of their own. Bolts of plasma and missiles streaked across the void, slamming into the alien flagship's hull. Explosions blossomed like small suns, tearing chunks of metal away. Still, the MR-Arca kept coming. Lyle gritted his teeth. Sweat ran down his face, stinging his eyes. Aim for her engines, cut off her tail. Target locked. The Resolute's last functioning gun battery unleashed a concentrated burst. The impact tore through the flagship's rear thrusters. Fire flared from the wound, not enough to destroy her, but enough to slow her down. For the first time, Zilka's voice came through, sharp and furious. You dare cripple me, human. Lyle smiled tiredly. You started it. In the engineering bay, Commander Vance wiped oil from his hands, staring at the reactor display. It was glowing dangerously bright. Every warning light screamed red. He knew they were minutes away from overload, but he kept working. That's what humans did, they kept going, no matter how bad it looked. Come on, old girl, he whispered to the ship. Hold together a little longer. He reached for a control lever and forced it down. The deck vibrated, power surging through every system. Back on the bridge, Lyle saw the reading spike. That's it, he said. We've got power, line up the forward guns. Sir, the core can't handle another. I know, do it anyway. They took aim. On the screen, the MR-Arcan flagship loomed larger and larger, its cannon charging again. The space between them shimmered with deadly light. Lyle's voice dropped to a whisper. Steady, steady. The alien weapon flared, but the Resolute fired first. A brilliant beam of plasma tore across the void, smashing into the flagship's main cannon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a chain reaction. Fire erupted across the MR-Arcan vessel, spreading like a storm. She's losing containment, Hallen shouted. Lyle watched as Zilka's ship began to break apart, huge sections splitting off in waves of molten light. He could almost imagine her face, proud, furious, unwilling to accept defeat. And that made him respect her in a strange way. But he had no time for respect. The shockwave was coming. Brace for impact. The explosion hit them like a god's fist. The Resolute spun violently, alarms screaming, hull tearing open in a dozen places. Gravity failed. The crew floated helplessly as the ship twisted through fire and debris. Lyle slammed into the floor, his world spinning. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he dragged himself upright. The bridge was half destroyed, smoke choking the air. Is everyone, he coughed hard, everyone alive? A few groans answered him. Hallen's voice came weakly through the smoke. Still here, barely. Lyle exhaled. Then get up, we're not done yet. He stumbled to the window. Outside, the alien flagship burned, broken but not gone. Parts of it still glowed with power. It was trying to rise again. He stared at it, chest heaving, blood trickling from his temple. "You just don't quit, do you?" he muttered. And then, quieter to himself, "Neither do we." The battle wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, the Deathworlders knew fear. And that, Lyle thought, was enough to start turning the tide. The stars were quiet again, too quiet. The sound of distant explosions had faded, leaving only the soft hum of dying engines. The Resolute drifted through a graveyard of wreckage, smoke trailing from her torn hull. Her lights flickered weakly, like a candle in a storm. Captain Lyle Garnet sat slumped in his command chair, blood drying on his face. His vision blurred every few seconds, but he forced himself to stay awake. Around him, the bridge was half destroyed, consoles sparking, glass shattered, air thick with smoke. He could hear the shallow breathing of his crew and the occasional moan of pain. They had survived. Barely. "Damage report," Lyle croaked. No one answered right away. Then Hallen's voice came from the floor near the navigation console. "Reactors stable for now. Hull breaches sealed, but we've lost half the life support systems. Communications are down." "Casualties?" Hallen hesitated. "Too many, sir." Lyle closed his eyes. He didn't ask for names. He couldn't. Every name would be another weight on his chest, and he was already drowning in them. Minutes passed in silence. The crew moved like ghosts, tending to fires, patching leaks, and dragging the wounded to med bays that barely functioned. Every sound was slow, heavy, like the ship itself was struggling to breathe. Outside the cracked viewport, the MR flagship still burned. It was crippled but alive, glowing red in the darkness. Its engines were silent, but its cannons still hummed faintly, gathering power. She wasn't done yet. Neither was he. But as Lyle stared at the enemy ship, doubt crept into his heart like cold water. What if this was the end? What if no one was coming? The fleet had gone silent after the first wave. No reinforcements, no signal, nothing but static. He and his crew were alone in this dead stretch of space, bleeding and broken, facing an enemy that refused to die. He had promised them victory. Now he wasn't sure he could deliver it. Down in engineering, Commander Vance worked with trembling hands. The reactor's glow flickered dangerously, casting long shadows on the walls. Every few minutes, something sparked, and he flinched. "Come on, girl," he whispered to the ship, tightening a bolt with shaking fingers. "Don't quit on us now." He knew the odds. The Resolute was running on hope and habit, and both were fatting. But when he thought about giving up, he saw the faces of his crew, the tired smiles, the bruised hands, the eyes that still looked to him for strength. That was enough to keep him moving. A voice crackled through the damaged comm. "Vance, it's Lyle. Talk to me." The engineer leaned against the wall, panting. "We're holding barely. If the core gets any hotter, we'll have to vent it manually." "That'll kill you," Lyle said. Vance gave a weak laugh. "Yeah, but it'll keep the ship alive." Lyle was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do what you have to. We're not done yet." Back on the bridge, the silence grew heavy. Lyle stared out at the drifting stars, his reflection faint in the cracked glass. He looked older than he remembered, the weight of command carved into every line of his face. He thought of Earth, of home, of green fields and rain and blue skis. He wondered if he'd ever see them again. Probably not. But if he couldn't go home, maybe he could make sure someone else did. "Captain," Hallen said softly, breaking the silence. "We can't take another fight. We're out of ammunition and the reactor's unstable. We should fall back, regroup if we can." Lyle didn't answer. "Sir," Hallen pressed, voice trembling, "if we stay here, we'll die." Lyle turned to look at him, eyes dark and hollow. "If we run, they'll hunt us down, and if they find Earth next—" He stopped himself, the words catching in his throat. The truth hung in the air between them. If the MRRK got past them, there'd be nothing left to stop them. Humanity's colonies, its people, gone. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't. Outside, the MRRK ship flickered. The main cannon glowed again, faint but growing stronger. "She's charging weapons," Hallen whispered. "She's coming back." Lyle clenched his fists. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like thunder. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing on him. So many had died already, good men and women, all trusting him to lead them home. He couldn't fail them now. But he was tired. God, he was so tired. He lowered his head, closing his eyes. "What would you do, Dad?" he murmured. He could almost hear his father's voice, calm, firm, full of stubborn warmth. "You fight, son. You fight until the stars go dark, because that's what we do." Lyle's eyes opened. There was fire in them again. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice steadier now, "prepare the remaining fighters." Hallen blinked. "Sir, we barely have any pilots left." "Then I'll fly one." The bridge went silent. "You're going out there?" Hallen asked, stunned. Lyle nodded slowly. "If that ship gets one more chance to fire, we're finished. We can't beat her from here. I'll take the fight to her myself." "But, sir, that's an order." Hallen swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Minutes later, the hangar bay doors opened. One fighter, old, patched together, barely spaceworthy, roared to life. Lyle sat inside, hands gripping the controls. Through the cracked canopy, he could see the burning enemy ship ahead, still trying to rise. He took a deep breath, feeling the ache in his ribs, the tremor in his hands. Fear whispered to him, but something stronger pushed it aside. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for every human who had ever stood against something stronger and refused to kneel. He opened the comm one last time. "To the crew of the Resolute," he said, voice steady. "You've done your part, now it's my turn." The hangar lights flickered as his fighter shot into the dark, leaving behind a trail of fire and hope. And as the small human ship flew toward the towering alien dreadnought, one truth echoed through the void. Humans might break, but they never stop fighting. The fighter hummed beneath Lyle, its hull rattling with every burst of speed. The Resolute was a distant memory now, swallowed by the black void. Lyle's fingers gripped the controls with fierce determination. He could barely feel his body anymore, just the cold air through the thin fighter canopy and the rush of adrenaline flooding his veins. Ahead, the MR flagship loomed large. She was still alive, her massive frame drifting through space, her cannon glowing a faint, dangerous red. Her weapons had been crippled before, but now she was regaining power. If she fired again, there would be no surviving it. Lyle's heart pounded in his chest, a heavy drumbeat. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to regroup, to fight another day. But there was no time for that. He was the last line of defense. "If I die today, then at least someone will know we fought to the end," he muttered to himself, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him. In the distance, the flagship began to rotate, its weapons lining up once again, charging. Lyle's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if it was the fear or the desperation that made his hands tremble as he pushed the throttle forward. "Come on," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "Not today." Back on the Resolute, Hallen and the crew watched helplessly from the bridge, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. The last fighter, Lyle's fighter, had vanished into the dark of space. The comms were dead. No reinforcements, no backup. It was just them and the MRR can. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Hallen said, his voice barely a whisper. Vance stood in the doorway, wiping his brow. His hands were covered in grease and blood. "Not if we don't do something." "We've done everything we can," Hallen replied, voice tight with frustration. "We've fought, we've bled, we're just too small, too weak." Vance walked over to the console. "I don't believe that for a second." Hallen looked up, blinking. "What? You think we're weak, just because we've got no reinforcements, no help, no time?" Vance's voice was low but steady. "We're not weak, we're human." Hallen opened his mouth to protest, but Vance cut him off. "Humans don't stop, we don't bend, we just—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "We just keep going, Hallen, even when everything says we shouldn't." Hallen stared at him for a long moment, and then something inside him shifted. He straightened, wiped his hands on his pants, and turned to the rest of the crew. "Get those engines back online," he shouted. "We're not done yet." In space, the distance between Lyle's fighter and the MR flagship shrank to almost nothing. The enemy ship's main cannon glowed brighter with every passing second, charging for one last devastating shot. The light it emitted felt like the sun itself, too powerful to survive. The pressure in Lyle's chest grew heavier, but he didn't let it slow him down. He had one shot, just one. His fighter vibrated with the force of the nearing cannon. The MR flagship wasn't fast, it was massive, slow, but it was powerful. The glow from the cannon expanded into an overwhelming wave of light. Lyle could feel it pulling at him. Not yet, he breathed. Not yet. He rolled his fighter to the side, dodging the first incoming pulse of energy. The blast streaked past, missing him by a fraction, but the shockwave shook his ship violently. His heart thundered. The cannon was still charging. He had seconds. Lyle's mind raced as his fighter pushed closer to the MR-Arcan ship. There was no way to escape the next blast. He needed to stop it before it fired. He targeted the flagship's weapons core, the heart of its destructive power. The ship was still rotating, still unstable. Lyle's fighter locked on, the targeting system blinking red. Just a little more, he muttered, his breath sharp. He pulled the trigger. The missile shot forward, streaking across the vast emptiness. The impact would be close, too close, but it had to work. Back on the Resolute, the crew watched in stunned silence as the last of Lyle's fighters' missiles shot toward the enemy. They couldn't see the impact, but they all felt it. Please, Hallen whispered. Seconds dragged on like hours. Then the flagship shuddered. A flash of blinding light erupted from its center, an explosion so powerful it illuminated the surrounding darkness like the dawn. The shockwave rippled across the void, sending debris spiraling outward. The MR-Arcan flagship staggered, its entire structure beginning to crumble under the force. Lyle's voice came through the comms, faint but clear. It's done. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. I'm coming home. Lyle felt the blast wave shake his fighter, but he held on, fighting the controls as his ship spiraled out of control. His vision blurred as he fought to stay conscious, his body screaming in pain. The explosion had hit the MR-Arcan flagship squarely. Its main cannon exploded in a burst of light, the ship's massive frame cracking apart under the shockwave. The MR-Arcan were finally defeated. But Lyle wasn't done yet. His fighter was too damaged. The controls were locked and the engine sputtered as he struggled to regain control. The stars outside blurred, shifting in his vision. His fingers slipped from the controls as his body gave out. The last thing he saw was the dark void, stretching ahead, and the burning wreckage of the enemy ship behind him. In the Resolute sickbay, Hallen stood at the door, eyes fixed on the screen. The fight was over. The MR-Arcan flagship was gone. The Resolute was still standing, barely. The crew had done it. Lyle had done it. They won, and they hadn't done it by strength, or numbers, or firepower. They'd done it with their stubborn refusal to die. As the crew began to cheer, Hallen looked up at the stars. He couldn't help but smile. The battle had been hard, but the human spirit had won, just as it always would. The silence in the aftermath of the battle felt heavier than the explosions that had torn through space. The stars outside the Resolute's shattered windows were calm, distant, far away from the destruction that had just unfolded. Lyle was awake, but he didn't know how. His body ached with every breath, his limbs stiff and bruised. His mind was clouded, slipping in and out of consciousness as the ship's medical systems worked tirelessly to stabilize him. The pain in his chest was a constant reminder that he'd pushed himself too far, too fast. But it wasn't the physical pain that hurt the most. It was the faces of the crew he'd lost. The crew he had promised to bring home. He opened his eyes slowly, the room spinning as he blinked against the harsh lights of the med bay. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled his nose, but it did little to clear his foggy head. "Captain, you're awake," a voice said, soft and familiar. It was Hallen. The lieutenant stood beside his bed, his face drawn with exhaustion but filled with relief. The others were standing by, just out of earshot, waiting. They hadn't let him rest, not until they knew he was alive. Lyle tried to speak, but his throat was dry and the words came out weak. How long?" "About 3 days," Hallen replied. "We almost lost you. You went into shock after the blast. Your body couldn't keep up with the damage." Lyle shifted, feeling the stiffness of his muscles, and grimaced. "What about the battle, the flagship?" Hallen's face softened. "We won, sir. We destroyed their flagship. The MR-Arcan are scattered, retreating. The fleet, it's over. We did it." Lyle closed his eyes again, letting the weight of those words sink in. We did it. He'd heard it from Hallen, but it felt like it had come from someone else, someone who had fought a different battle. His fight wasn't over. Not yet. He forced his eyes open again. How many? Hallen hesitated, his eyes shifting toward the other crew members. He seemed to struggle with the words. "Too many, Captain. We lost almost half the crew, and the damage to the ship, we're not sure we can make it back to Earth on our own." Lyle's chest tightened at the news. His heart ached with the truth, but he forced himself to swallow the lump in his throat. He couldn't afford to break now, not when they'd come this far. "Then we'll make it," he said, his voice rough but resolute. "We've survived this long, we'll survive until we get home." Back on the bridge, the atmosphere was tense. The Resolute was still intact, but just barely. Most of the systems were functioning at a fraction of their normal capacity, and many of the crew were still recovering from the battle. They were a patchwork team now, doing everything they could just to stay alive. Hallen stood at the helm, guiding the ship forward, trying to keep their course steady. Beside him, Vance worked feverishly at the console, rerouting power to keep the engines running. The ship creaked and groaned under the strain, but it kept moving. "We're still a long way from Earth," Hallen muttered, looking at the map. "We've got enough fuel for a few weeks, but after that, I'm not sure." Vance wiped sweat from his brow, the strain visible on his face. "We'll make it. We have to for them." Hallen's eyes flickered to the crew members in the room. The quiet ones, the broken ones. They had fought hard and they had survived, but the cost was clear. They weren't the same as before. None of them would ever be the same again. "We've all lost something," Hallen said quietly. "But we've gained something too. We've learned that we're stronger than we thought." Vance nodded, though his face was tight with grief. "It's not over, not yet, but we've shown them what we're made of." Lyle stood at the bridge hours later, staring out into the black void. The stars seemed so far away now, like they belonged to another life. His chest still burned with the memory of the final battle, the explosion that had torn through the flagship, the desperate flight toward the enemy's heart. He had done what he could, but so many had paid the price. Behind him, the crew worked, their faces blank with exhaustion, their bodies moving on autopilot. They were tired, they were broken, but they were alive. "You did good, Captain," Hallen said, stepping up beside him. "You saved us." Lyle's eyes lingered on the stars ahead, and for a moment he thought of his father again, of the words that had kept him going, that had kept them all going. "You fight until the stars go dark." He didn't have the strength to speak, so he simply nodded. "We lost a lot," Hallen continued, his voice softer now. "But we won. Against impossible odds, we won." Lyle's eyes narrowed, focusing on the distant specks of light. "We didn't win for us," he said quietly. "We won for everyone else, for the people back home, for the future." The weight of his words settled over them both. The crew had fought for Earth, for the colonies, for everything humanity had built. But they had fought for something else too, for the human spirit, for the resilience that defined them. Lyle took a deep breath, his chest still aching, but not as much. The pain would always be there, a reminder of what they had lost, but it was also a reminder of what they had won. And in the end, that was what mattered. He turned to Hallen, offering a small, tired smile. "Keep her steady, Lieutenant. We're not done yet. We still have a long way to go." Hallen gave a sharp nod, determination rising in his eyes. "A long way to go, sir." And so they sailed through the stars, the crew of the Resolute, survivors of the greatest battle they'd ever known, carrying the weight of their loss, but also the strength of their victory. They had proven once and for all that even in the face of impossible odds, humanity would always stand tall.